Welcome to This Explainer. So today we are diving headfirst into a highly charged television panel that perfectly captures the current, well, frankly, explosive crosshairs of Australian politics. It's like politicians are battling it out across two totally different, wildly colorful fronts right now. On one side, you've got this volatile domestic turf war over election teaming, and on the other, the incredibly complex, high-stakes, deep blue waters of national security. Let's map out our route for today. First up, we'll look at the battle for the right. Then, we're comparing napkins versus credible plans. Third, the national security question. Fourth, constitutional limits on citizens. And finally, the political clash over security. All right, part one, the battle for the right, featuring the coalition and one nation. We're starting off by mapping out the ideological borders on the political right. There's been this long-running speculation about an election team-up, and you know what? It has recently just hit a complete boiling point. So, One Nation leader Pauline Hanson has been out there publicly urging the Liberal coalition to join forces. She went straight to Opposition Leader Angus Taylor with a super clear message. She said, "I'm not your enemy, let's work together." Her core argument here is heavily rooted in populism. She's insisting that the people of Australia are literally crying out for change, and she's basically asking the coalition to listen to those frustrated voters instead of treating her like the opposition. But wow, the Liberal leadership offered a really sharp, uncompromising rejection to that. Angus Taylor absolutely blasted the minor party, calling it a one-person show. And Deputy Opposition Leader Jane Hume, she warned that siding with One Nation would cause an eternity of pain for Australians. So they definitely acknowledge the voter anger out there, but they are drawing a massive line in the sand. The alternative is absolutely not One Nation. Moving on to part two, napkins versus credible plans. We're talking slogans versus costed policies. And this brings us right to exactly how the coalition justifies that incredibly hard line against a potential ally on the right. Jane Hume paints a really stark contrast between their two approaches. She argues that One Nation actively avoids costing their policies because, well, they just don't want to know the financial reality. She even categorized their platform as just slogans written on the back of a napkin. In contrast, she points to the coalition's highly structured, credible financial plans. Things like a tax-back guarantee to fight inflation, a future generations fund tapping into sovereign wealth, and linking migration directly to housing. But here is the absolutely crucial political reality, and it's a bit of a curveball. Despite the coalition's intense focus on all these detailed economic plans, the television host pushed back with a pretty hard truth. Right now, those uncosted, so-called napkin policies are actually really resonating with people. We're seeing this massive collision between the demand for traditional political credibility and genuine voter frustration, where the appeal of simple, sweeping change is just pulling people in like a magnet. Okay, part three, the national security question and the fate of returning citizens. Let's transition from domestic policy and see how this overarching demand for a credible plan plunges us into a much graver, way more intense scenario, navigating the deep, complex waters of international borders. The panel debate rapidly shifted gears to external threats, specifically the news that 13 Australian men, suspected ISIS fighters, might soon be freed from Iraqi prisons. Minister Tony Burke came out and stated the government will offer absolutely zero assistance to help them return. But the panel really pressed Health Minister Mark Butler on this. They wanted to know, how can the government be sure they won't return anyway, especially when you factor in the history of ISIS brides returning and the incredibly severe atrocities these men are alleged to have committed overseas. To ground this superheated debate in reality, Mark Butler focused on one specific number, 45. Because, this isn't just some isolated out-of-the-blue crisis. It's a challenge security agencies have been managing for over a decade. In fact, 45 men who went to the Middle East to fight for the caliphate had already returned to Australia before the current Labour government even took office in 2022. Which brings us to part four, constitutional limits on citizens and the legal reality of borders. To understand why any Australian government can't just permanently ban these individuals, which is a question a lot of people are naturally asking, we have to look at the very strict, immovable legal realities that bind our security agencies. Mark Butler actually laid out a very specific three-step framework here. First, strict constitutional limits prevent any government from permanently banning a citizen from returning home. You just can't do it. Second, to manage this, intelligence agencies advise the use of temporary exclusion orders. And third, if these individuals do cross the border, they get zero government assistance and are met immediately with the absolute full force of the law, which means prosecution and charges right off the bat. And here is a super interesting point of defense he made. Those temporary exclusion orders, They were actually put in place by the former coalition government. Butler made sure to highlight that these are legally sound provisions, heavily scrutinized and completely supported by a bipartisan committee. So the underlying mechanics here aren't some new partisan invention at all. They're actually a shared, long-standing security framework. Finally, Part 5, political clash over security and the demand for a plan. Because despite that shared legal framework we just talked about, the panel's rhetoric escalated fast, and it circled right back around to that central burning question: who actually has a credible plan? Jane Hum accused the current government of total evasion. She demanded a rock-solid, concrete plan for the exact moment these men might step foot on Australian soil, and claimed the coalition had a plan to immediately put returnees behind bars. But Mark Butler fired right back. He countered that Labor is literally executing the exact same protocols developed by intelligence agencies under the coalition. He strongly urged the opposition not to play everyday politics with such a complex, bipartisan security issue. Looking at these starkly painted political battle lines leaves us with a pretty critical question. In an environment where screaming about napkin policies and having no plan or such potent, brightly colored weapons in domestic elections, is genuine bipartisan cooperation on complex national security even possible anymore? Or are our international borders always going to get pulled into the crossfire of the daily political panel? It's definitely something to think about the next time you hear a politician demand a credible plan.